online, mas agora começamos a ver algumas vantagens no formato remoto, inclusive a possibilidade de conectar pessoas de diferentes regiões do país, né, um monte de gente apaixonada pelo gótico. Em 2011, eu fiz um primeiro simpósio gótico aqui na UFSC. Foi um evento local, regional, né, ligado à pós-graduação em inglês. De 2011 até 2018, foram 5 edições do simpósio. Daí, em 2016, a professora Luciana Colucci e o professor Júlio França fizeram na Universidade Federal do Triângulo Mineiro o primeiro seminário de estudos de gótico, que hoje está aqui na sua 4ª edição, né? Esse evento, que tinha uma outra configuração, projetou o gótico no cenário nacional, abrangendo pesquisadores e estudantes de todo o Brasil. E o grupo Estudos do Gótico, no CNPq, tem contribuído também muito para esse fim. Nossa proposta para essa edição, o 4º SEG, foi promover um nível de internacionalização, trazendo a professora e pesquisadora Ilse M para realizar a palestra de encerramento. E sim, nós fizemos questão que fosse uma mulher, uma pesquisadora latino-americana, que transita em contextos nacionais e internacionais. Agora, vejam só, né? O gótico é esse termo que tem origem na literatura e na crítica literária anglo-americana, e a professora Ilse Bussin, assim como muitos pesquisadores que falaram no 4º SEG, identificam em seus respectivos trabalhos uma manifestação diferente do gótico, na Costa Rica, no Brasil e em outros países da América Latina. O gótico latino-americano, assim por dizer, né, ele homenageia, mas ele também zomba de escritores como Radcliffe, Lewis, Shelley, Poe, Bronte, Stoker, dentre tantos outros. Nós, latino-americanos, reivindicamos e reconfiguramos as imagens, os tropos, os discursos que predominam no gótico anglo-americano e no gótico europeu. Nas mãos de escritores, né, de cineastas, de artistas latino-americanos, essas imagens, né, os tropos góticos, eles são usados para refletir questões que são pertinentes à identidade latino-americana que compartilhamos, a qual, não importa o país, é permeada por diversos tipos de violência, pela colonização, pela escravidão. Desse caldo primordial, né, para usar uma expressão do Oparim, cada país aborda, transforma, projeta essas questões em seus próprios contextos nacionais, muitas vezes representados em cenários tropicais, ou subtropicais, ou cenários sertanistas, ou cenários amazônicos. Por exemplo, a professora Ilse Bussin tem um trabalho sobre fotografia post-mortem na Costa Rica, mas hoje ela está aqui para falar sobre rituais, esse conjunto de cerimônias que devem se observar nos cultos e atos formais. A fala dela sobre Pagan Gothic passa por diversos exemplos da literatura, do cinema, da escultura, chegando ao fato que há um tipo de conforto nesses rituais. All right, so here we go. Ilse Marie Bussin is professor in English and Comparative Literature in the Department of Modern Languages at the University of Costa Rica. She holds a Bachelor of Arts from the College of William and Mary in the state of Virginia, which is among one of the oldest institutions of higher education in the United States. She holds a Master's in Latin American Literature from the University of Costa Rica, and she read for her PhD at the University of Edimburgo in Scotland, and her dissertation is entitled The Haunted House, Mid to Late Victorian Gothic Fiction, in which she explores the links between architecture and social history, and some of her main interests encompass the study of space in literature, and of course, Gothic fiction, Victorian Gothic fiction. She has published extensively. So I will mention here just some of her works, starting with the article Sequestered Spaces and Defective Doors in Tales by Collins and Riddell, which I have here. On a more personal note, Professor Ilse and I met in 2011 when she contributed with an article to this book. And she also wrote the book Dark Latitudes, Mapping Gothic Sites and Mediums. That's from 2016. You can find it on Amazon. And her latest book is Doubles and Hybrids in Latin American Gothic from 2019, which she edited with Antonio Alcalá. Professor Ilse, thank you very much for being here. Not just here, the work started actually last week when we tested all the technology. And so thank you very much for your time, for being so generous, being here with us today. And I'll hand the word to you. The floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Muito obrigada. É prazer estar aqui hoje. I practiced that many times. But so since that is the extent of my Portuguese, I will now be switching to English, luckily for everyone who is listening. I will be reading from the paper, but I will also be sharing some movie clips. So hopefully the reading is not going to seem or appear as monotonous. And I would also, well, before I even start reading, I would just like to say as a somewhat of a disclaimer that I was very recently interested in this topic of Pagan Gothic. And so this paper today, instead of being an exhaustive account of my research, is more of a theoretical framework or a vantage point with which to approach what I'm calling today Pagan Gothic works, right? And that is going to be part of the discussion. What is Pagan Gothic? Or does that even exist? Is that even a valid label? So I will begin with the reading. I'm going to be sharing my screen, and please let me know if you can see it okay. Is that, yes, can people see that properly, hopefully? Okay, so I will be starting, sorry. Can you see the full slide when I do that?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. My talk today is entitled Pagan Gothic, The Horrors and Comforts of Ritual. It is an ambitious title and perhaps one that might very quickly become problematic. The potential problem lies not in the controversy that might arise over religious views, but rather from the label Pagan Gothic or the term pagan itself. I will begin with a brief discussion of the better-known subgenre of folk horror, and then turn to what I mean by Pagan Gothic, not in order to argue that one of the two labels is more valid than the other, but in order to better delineate the themes that I will be discussing today. I would like to address these Pagan Gothic elements by taking a look at specific examples in literature and film, mainly Arthur Machen's novella, The Great God Pan, and Ari Aster's film, Midsummer. We will also consider a few other examples. Hopefully, by the end of this discussion, the title that I have selected and its significance will become clearer, especially by considering the undeniable importance of ritual and its fundamental role in Pagan Gothic texts. Let's begin with the concept of folk horror. The following clip from the recent film Apostle should catch your attention, especially after that pretty straightforward introduction. This clip gives you a taste, albeit a bloody one, of what critics mean when they attempt to define folk horror. After a woman has been kidnapped, her brother, Thomas Richardson, travels to a Welsh island to rescue her, and he encounters a cult that not only kidnaps people from the mainland in order to sustain themselves economically, but also to sustain the group's practice of human sacrifice. Richardson unveils the true horror of this place when he discovers the presence of a goddess of the island, and when he sees that her power is harnessed for the cult's advantage. She is in fact kept prisoner and granted human blood and bodies in order to ensure the island's fertility. So I'm going to play that clip for you. Hopefully you won't have any trouble hearing it.
Showed yourself. To him. Why? He's not to be trusted. He won't worship you. As I. No more shall you poison our crop. I swear you shall starve, lest you give us pure harvest.
Gareth Evans' cult horror film depicting an interpretation of Celtic pagan mythology showcases all the components of this subgenre, which is loosely defined and has been predominantly applied to cinema and television. The main themes in folk horror are a rural setting, this community's blind fervor for their folkloric and religious beliefs, themes of isolation, and the power of nature. All of these elements turn very dark, very soon. And so an isolated community is not just quaint and charming. It actually kills its painfully naive visitors. Religious beliefs are presented in cult-like and dangerous terms, demanding blood and sacrifice, and outsiders and locals alike suffer the consequences of not only extreme beliefs, but also of a vengeful nature that can undoubtedly be studied from an eco-Gothic stance. In these texts, films, or written tales, Mother Nature strikes back in supernatural and perverse forms, defending itself from the environmental crisis fueled by the indifference of human beings and their voracious behavior. The critic Adam Scovell has written extensively on folk horror, but the label can be originally attributed to director Piers Haggard, who wrote, and that's the first quote that I'm presenting in the slide. And he said the following: "As this was a story about people subject to superstitions about living in the woods, the dark poetry appealed to me. I was trying to make a folk horror film, I suppose. Furthermore, in a 2010 BBC documentary, History of Horror, 3 British films are named as the holy trinity of the subgenre: The Witchfinder General, The Blood on Satan's Claw, and of course, The Wicker Man, which some of you might have seen already. Furthermore, some examples from the United States are the following, and I will be presenting a short clip of the last one from Children of the Corn, which is also based on a 1976 short story of the same name by Stephen King. More recent examples that will be familiar to some of you are The Witch, Hereditary, Apostle, and of course, Midsummer. A brief look at the dates of the first wave of films indicate that there was something happening during and after the 1960s, which provided fertile ground for this subgenre to develop. Adam Scovell has pointed out that the 1960s counterculture and New Age movements provided this impetus. Likewise, the most recent rise in this type of film and literary texts has to do with social and cultural phenomena that we are currently experiencing. I will be offering my own opinion later on about the reason for this recent resurgence of this genre. Folk horror and its effects can be better understood while looking at the description in an article by Martin Waits, and it's the quotation that you can see now. And he actually provides a very beautiful, very lyrical description of the sensations that one might experience with the subgenre. And he says, folk horror thrives in liminal spaces, in the gaps between worlds, in landscapes of rough earth and gnarled old trees, with humming pylons stretching overhead, in the half-imagined things glimpsed in the wooded shadows out of the corners of eyes, making hiking visitors quicken their step, in the feeling that no matter how alone one feels sitting by a lake or on a moor, one can't shake the feeling of being watched, of being followed. Up to this point, I have referred to folk horror as a subgenre limited to the screen. But as some critics like Bernice Murphy have noticed, it also encompasses fiction, the fiction lineage. She cites Shirley Jackson's story, The Lottery, from 1948, as a foundational text. The works that I will consider today can all be placed effortlessly within the folk horror tradition, but I would now like to turn to what I am referring to as Pagan Gothic. First of all, it is necessary to address a general meaning of the term pagan. Pagan may be defined in this way, as the first quotation says, a synonym for heathen or for a follower of a polytheistic religion. It has also been defined as a religion that worships many gods, especially one that existed before other main world religions. When referring to paganism or neo-paganism, these terms are employed as collective terms for religious practices or beliefs influenced by these pre-Christian religions. Among these modern practices inspired by past religions are the following terms that you see here: Wicca, heathenry, etc. In addition to neo-pagan religions, there is pagan studies, a fairly recent academic field that takes a look at contemporary paganism through the interdisciplinary lens of anthropology, archaeology, folklore, sociology, and religious studies. I would like to clarify that while acknowledging the popularity of neo-paganism and the field of pagan studies is essential, I will be approaching the topic and the texts from my academic background in Gothic studies and comparative literature. We will be analyzing certain texts focusing on religious behavior, specifically the emphasis on rituals, echoing pre-Christian beliefs, or for the most part, rituals that manifest a modern take or interpretation of these belief systems. Instead of focusing on other components provided by the folk horror label, such as isolation, a rural setting, or the vengeful power of nature, we will concentrate on certain elements of religious and ritualistic behavior displayed in these texts, which are often portrayed in a very grotesque manner, as in, the clip that we already watched, as clearly horrific and horrifying acts. However, I would also like to argue that the ritual component in these texts also functions in a productive and even a surprisingly comforting way, at least for the community as a whole, clearly not for those who are being sacrificed during these pagan celebrations. Several critics have focused on the way in which this subgenre highlights negative aspects of a cult-like community, as in the following comment discussing British folk horror classics. And Waite says the following: they're perfect for our society at the moment. They're nostalgic in and of themselves, but not for a bucolic rural Britain. They all show how scared communities unsure of their place in the world can be, easily taken over by silver-tongued and gimlet-eyed demagogues. The following clip from Children of the Corn, from the movie from 1984, exemplifies this notion, with the added bonus that the demagogue in question, or leader of the group, is a child, thus showcasing the figure of the Gothic child, which is a trope that never fails to generate fear.
Behold, a dream did come to me in the night, and the Lord did show all this to me. Praise God! Praise the Lord! A time of tribulation has come. A test is at hand. The final test.
What has the Lord commanded?
In the dream, the Lord did come to me, and he was a shape. It was he who walks behind the rose. And I did fall on my knees in terror and hide my eyes, lest the fierceness of his face strike me dead. He told me all that has since happened. He said, Joseph has taken his things and fled this happy place, because the worship of me is no more upon him. So take you his life and spill his blood, like water upon the earth. But let not the flesh pollute the corn. Cast him instead upon the road.
And so it was done. Joseph the betrayer was cast out.
And he who walks behind the rows did say, I will send outlanders amongst you, a man and a woman. And these outlanders will be unbelievers and profaners of the holy.
I wish Christian never came here. But he's always been here, just like he who walks behind the rows.
And the
Since this is an American film based on Stephen King's tale, Murphy's following observation fits perfectly when she says, American examples of the subgenre also tend to dramatize the suspicion that the only thing more terrifying than a hillbilly with a chainsaw is a hillbilly with religion, or a Bible, I would add. Nonetheless, I suggest that instead of limiting the scope of the discussion to an analysis of negative cult-like behavior, for which there is ample evidence, we can consider how these texts are more complex than that by taking a look at religious concepts that are present in Pagan Gothic and its rituals. In order to do so, we will now turn to Arthur Machen's work and three religious concepts that he explores, especially in his novella, The Great God Pan, published in 1894. For those of you who have not read it, the main events in the plot are the following. So this novella showcases this character, this mad scientist called Dr. Raymond, and also a series of mysterious occurrences involving a femme fatale named Helen Vaughn. The beginning of the novella presents Dr. Raymond performing this sort of lobotomy on Mary, a young girl that he, quote unquote, rescues from poverty. The procedure is meant to heighten Mary's spiritual awareness and to allow her to, quote unquote, see the god Pan. This operation, echoing lobotomies, as I mentioned previously, leaves poor Mary a hopeless idiot, but it is never entirely clear if she actually saw the god Pan, and this is the reason for her condition. Months later, she gives birth to Helen Vaughan, who grows up to prey on mostly male victims who are corrupted, body and soul, by her. According to Joshi, who wrote about this author's work, the sole goal of Machen's philosophy is to restore the sense of wonder and mystery into our perception of the world. Everything that tended to foster such a goal, mysticism, occultism, Catholicism, symbolism, was to be encouraged, and everything that hindered it, Protestantism, because of its appealing too much to the rational intellect, science, rationalism, realism, was to be furiously combated. The great god Pan will help us understand three religious concepts that appear throughout Machen's work and Pagan Gothic texts, and which are the following. The first one being the concept of lifting the veil, the second one being the notion of ecstasy, and the third one would be sacrament. Before performing the procedure, Dr. Raymond explains to his friend Clark what he intends to do, which is to, quote unquote, lift the veil between the superficial world that we are able to perceive in order to see the real spirit world beyond. So he says this first quotation here. There is a real world, but it is beyond this glamour and this vision. I do not know whether any human being has ever lifted the veil. The ancients knew what lifting the veil means. They called it seeing the god Pan. And then the following is another example of the same concept in the text. The fact that Machen shows this deity, the god Pan, as a central aspect of his work is incredibly significant for this study, of course, since this half-man, half-goat figure is, first of all, pagan, and even though he is known as a lesser deity, he embodies aspects of nearly all pagan belief systems. Pan is a force of nature, he is energetic, often frightening, and he personifies the unbridled force of nature and a potent sexual energy representing fertility. Machen's work can be placed within the Pagan Gothic label easily, since there are numerous pre-Christian references. There are classical ones, such as Pan, of course, the Roman ruins, and the road. And there's also Celtic references, such as Nodens, the god associated with healing, hunting, dogs, and the ocean. Aaron Worth notes how Machen, like British Gothic writers before him, turned to the British past and to various mythologies of its different pagan inhabitants by considering, and this is the last quote, Neolithic barrows, henge monuments, Roman ruins, Saxon artifacts, as worthy settings for their haunted tales. In this novella, then, one of the most significant religious concepts is that of lifting the veil in order to reveal not only a spiritual reality, but a pre-Christian one. In the following clip from Midsummer, we witness the lifting of the veil that Dani experiences after she has drunk a hallucinogenic tea and partaken in the dance. So this is the clip that I'm talking about.
Oh, left! Stop! Maria! Stop! Maria!
you're trapped. I don't speak Swedish. What? Syllabus is Swedish English.
Vi har fått vår markdrottning!
There are numerous instances, sorry, excuse me for a second, I started playing it again. There are numerous instances in Midsummer in which hallucinogenic substances enable the lifting of the veil. Philosophical and theological treatises discuss how pagan belief systems in the past and present, unlike mainstream monotheistic religions, not only allow but actually encourage the use of substances and other means through which followers can pierce through their immediate reality and lift this veil. There are examples, of course, of monotheistic practices, such as in revivalist gatherings, in which emotional responses are also encouraged. So this is a bit of a, generalization. Without meaning to make this sound like a New Age manual, one can still affirm that these pagan Gothic works reject a strict observance of reason. Instead, they favor a spiritual experience mainly based on emotion, the body, and valuing the sensation of the soul being lifted or detached from the body through these means. In the clip, the heavy breathing, the turning, and the dance itself all point to this insistence on corporeality and escaping sheer rationalism. And I don't know if you noticed, but at the end of the clip, Danny's able to even understand and speak Swedish. One can clearly argue that this is, part or a symptom of this hallucinogenic experience. But if we dig deeper than that, we could also argue that it evinces a greater connection with the community around her, with the Harga community. The second religious notion in Machen's work that can aid us in this analysis is that of ecstasy. Machen attempts to define his nebulous notion in the following manner. And he says, substitute, if you like, rapture, beauty, adoration, wonder, awe, mystery, sense of the unknown, desire for the unknown. In every case, there will be that withdrawal from the common life and the common consciousness, which justifies my choice of ecstasy as the best symbol of my meaning. If one looks for an alternate definition for ecstasy, one encounters fascinating synonyms and nuances that can also help us understand pagan Gothic texts. So, for instance, the first one says, a state of being beyond reason and self-control, a state of overwhelming emotion, especially rapturous delight. Trance, of course, is mentioned, mystic or prophetic trance. And then there is this very compelling synonym, transport, that describes any powerful emotion that lifts one out of oneself and usually provokes vehement expression or frenzied action. The philosophical and aesthetic concept of the sublime, of course, also comes to mind, but I'm not going to go into it because that would be obviously another paper. The following image of Gian Lorenzo Bernini's statue, Ecstasy of Saint Teresa, which is this one, in Rome, is a striking materialization or embodiment of ecstasy. This sculpture captures the saint's vision, in which an angel pierces her heart with a fiery arrow of divine love. The transported saint's expression and her languid body capture the possibility that even in mainstream religions, such as the Catholic one, spiritual ecstasy cannot be divorced from sexual ecstasy, a notion that most pagan traditions share and promote. The following clip in Midsummer takes place near the end, after the final offering and the burning of the people and corpses in the Yellow Barn. The behavior in the gathering clearly displays this collective transport or ecstasy. Both the lifting of the veil and ecstasy then point to the need for the soul to transcend the body, as is the third concept that is prevalent in Machen's work and in Pagan Gothic texts, that of the sacrament. According to Machen, man is a sacrament, soul manifested under the form of the body. In The Great Godpan, Dr. Raymond's friend Clark describes what he experiences after accidentally inhaling intoxicating perfumes in the scientist's office. And this is the quote that you have in front of you. And the wood was hushed, and for a moment in time he stood face to face there with a presence that was neither man nor beast, neither the living nor the dead, but all things mingled, the form of all things, but devoid of all form. And in that moment, the sacrament of body and soul was dissolved, and a voice seemed to cry, "Let us go hence." And then the darkness of darkness beyond the stars, the darkness of everlasting. Machen's work constantly refers to and insists on the importance of this dissolution and separation of the body from the soul. In Midsummer, the sacrament of body and soul is equally dissolved when Danny's body and soul connect with those of the natural world around her.
Ilse.
Yes?
I'm sorry, I think we are down. They are saying here in the comments, perhaps because of the
Okay.
because of the clips we have been showing.
Oh yeah, it says stream unavailable. Should I stop sharing my screen? Let's see. I'm gonna stop sharing for now, and I'm gonna listen. My friend is listening, and she wrote this to me.
No sé si ahorita donde empezaste a hablar del sacrament, se puso eso, stream suspended for policy violations.
Oh,
Yo no
crap. Could it be because of the...
We have been caught by bots, by robots, copyrights, and...
Oh, wow. So maybe I stop showing clips?
How many more how many more do you have?
Oh, it's quite a bit, but I can tell you what happens in the clips.
They're saying YouTube.
That's such a shame.
I didn't see that coming.
Yeah, I didn't either, obviously, or else I wouldn't have even done it.
Are we still live?
I don't think so because it says stream unavailable. So should we leave and maybe try to go in?
I'm gonna ask Raquel and Márcio. What's going on?
We are live.
Are we
We are
live?
back.
Oh, we are back.
Are we back?
Yeah. Yeah, Raquel says we are back.
Okay. So should I go on without the clips? I can just show the and maybe sort of describe what happens in the clips. How is that?
That would be great. I think you were talking about sacrament.
Yes. I know where I am. I could share, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to share my screen, but let me see if I can do it again. And please let me know if you can see. You can see my screen, correct?
We can see it, yeah.
Okay, so basically I'm not gonna go into the clip, but I'm gonna talk about it, if that's okay. And let's see, this one is, okay, so for those of you who haven't seen Midsummer, I'm not gonna give you a whole summary of it. I'm just gonna say, after they drink the tea in this clip, Danny, the protagonist, looks down and then she can actually see grass growing on her feet, on the top of her feet. So this scene, beyond merely depicting a drug trip, as many others brilliantly do in the film, emphasizes the deconstruction of Danny's body and soul and a new reconfiguring under pagan precepts. Under pagan beliefs, Danny's individual body ceases to exist as it connects and becomes part of nature, thus addressing the common pagan belief in animism. And sorry, I'm gonna pause for a second and ask you if it's better if I just show the whole slide, even if I'm not gonna show the clip. Does that look well? I'm gonna move to the slide that we were in. Is that better? Should I leave it like that, or should I show it otherwise? I hope I can I hope it looks okay like this. Under pagan beliefs, Danny's body ceases to exist as it connects and becomes part of nature, thus addressing the common pagan belief in animism, or the notion that all animate and inanimate objects have their own spirit, and that all beings are intertwined and, in a sense, weaved into a single fabric. In many religions, especially the Catholic one, which Machen admired for its insistence on ritual, the notion of the sacrament is of utmost importance. So I'm not going to read the whole quotation, but you can see that there's, in the Roman Catholic tradition and many Orthodox churches, there's a celebration of 7 rites or 7 sacraments: baptism, confirmation, the Eucharist, penance, anointing of the sick, ordination, and matrimony. And among Protestants, you have the celebration of 2 of those rites, baptism and the Eucharist. One of these sacraments in many Christian religions, that of the Eucharist, bears undeniable marks of a pagan origin. The Eucharist is a symbolic recreation of the Last Supper, in which Jesus Christ asks his disciples to share bread and wine in his memory. The bread as representative of his body, and the wine as a symbol of his blood. Nevertheless, the reference to consuming Christ's body clearly reeks not only of human sacrifice, but also cannibalism, a matter that has been pointed out extensively by critics, yet shrouded by mainstream religions that prefer to distance themselves from the pagan origins of this ritual that is viewed today as too gruesome for comfort. Incidentally, the webpage, and it's this webpage, the Dominican Friars from England and Scotland, presents the following definition and illustration for the Eucharist. And they say, this is a slide after that. They say the Eucharist is both a sacrament and a sacrifice. As a sacrament, it is received as the soul's nourishment. As a sacrifice, it is offered to God for the needs of the world. So it's useful to keep this in mind while we now turn to rituals presented in Pagan Gothic, specifically that of human sacrifice. Let's consider the seemingly contradictory subtitle of this talk: The Horrors and Comforts of Ritual. In order to first address the first element, that of horror, we have already established how even in mainstream traditions, the Eucharist is both sacrament and sacrifice, retaining the pagan notion about the importance of animal and human sacrifice, despite the Church's effort to distance itself from this primitive practice. In fact, in the aforementioned source, we find this clear explanation for the role of offering blood in the Old Testament. So I'm not going to read it, but as you can see, there's ample evidence for sacrifice and the importance of offerings of blood in the Old Testament. Okay, so literature and film belonging to this subgenre capture the horror of human sacrifice, as Bernice Murphy has noted, and I quote, "Ritualized human sacrifice is a common climactic trope and is often connected to arcane rites intended to ensure the fertility of the crops." One of the most commemorated images of human sacrifice in film is present in The Wicker Man, the 1973 classic. Incidentally, there is an ill-received 2006 remake of the same name. The Wicker Man, or in the movie, Sergeant Neil House travels to the Hebrides in Scotland. So I'm going to pass the slide. To investigate the case of a missing girl, only to discover that the islanders have renounced their Christian faith in order to practice a pagan Celtic religion. The sergeant, a devout Christian, is deeply troubled as he witnesses a maypole celebration and other practices that encourage nudity and sex, God forbid, even amongst the younger inhabitants. The following clip that takes place before the burning is interesting, since the dialogue reveals the tension between pagan and Christian faiths in regards to sacrifice and belief systems in general. And I wonder if it would be a good idea or not to try to play this slide, since it doesn't belong to Midsummer. I don't know if we're getting the problem from Midsummer or not. I don't know if I should try it, Professor.
Someone said if you fast forward through it, it should be okay.
Thank you very much for that. Let's try that. I'm gonna try to do that, except we won't be hearing all of the dialogue. So maybe I'm gonna try it from here.
Not you damned apples. change the fact that I believe in the life eternal as promised to us by our Lord Jesus Christ. I believe in the life eternal as promised to us by our Lord Jesus Christ.
That is good. For believing what you do, we confer upon you a rare gift these days, a martyr's death. You will not only have life eternal, but you will sit with the saints among the elect. Come. It is time to keep your appointment with the Wicker Man.
I am so glad we got to see Christopher Lee's amazing hairstyle in that one, of course. Not only that, but his voice and the phrase, of course, it is time to keep your appointment with the Wicker Man. So fittingly, in this clip, a Christian is chosen as the sacrifice intended by the pagan islanders to increase the fertility of the fields, in the same manner in which the character named Christian in Midsummer, right? Christian is Danny's boyfriend, is set on fire towards the end of Midsummer in an obvious echo or nod to this 1973 classic. Incidentally, the pagan tradition of the Wicker Man was indeed recorded by Greek and Roman writers who witnessed the ritual on the British Isles. Strabo, a Greek geographer, writes about another Greek traveler's account by the name of Posidonius. He claimed to have witnessed the rite and described the Wicker Man as an immense wooden structure with a lattice of flexible branches. I'm going to show you the slide where you can see it. In which animals and often prisoners of war were contained and later burned as an offering to the gods, very much like this depiction in the Wicker Man movie from 1973. The larger structure of the Wicker Man symbolically represents the whole community, with the individual animals or people within the cages supporting the larger scaffolding through their sacrifice, thus ensuring the prosperity for the whole through the sacrifice of a few. Fire is still employed in pagan celebrations today, such as Beltane in the United Kingdom, to symbolize cleansing, rebirth, and fertility. Human sacrifice as a sacrament, as presented in pagan Gothic works, proves both repulsive and exhilarating. As Joshi has commented about Machen's work, the sacrament, the ritual whereby one establishes a mystic union with God, can be both sacred and sacrilegious, and breaking down of the barrier between soul and body can be both awesome and terrifying. In Stephen King's short story mentioned previously, The Children of the Corn, a couple traveling through Nebraska encounters a cult led by murderous children and teenagers who worship a bloodthirsty deity that inhabits the cornfields, as you saw in the first clip that I showed you of the movie. In the story, the naive outsiders enter a church in which the children have created a Christ fashioned on more ancient and cruel beliefs. So, and this is the second quote, "This Christ had green hair, which on closer examination revealed itself to be a twining mass of early summer corn. The picture was crudely done, but effective. It looked like a comic strip mural done by a gifted child, an Old Testament Christ, or a pagan Christ that might slaughter his sheep for sacrifice instead of leading them." In this passage, there is a clear syncretism at work. The Christian deity has suffered a transmutation of sorts, or a devolution, with hair composed of summer corn, instantly connecting him to nature with a capital N, and to agrarian elements of ancient worship. In Midsummer, one of the offerings is a crucified outsider hanging upside down, but this time he functions as a spectacle for the blood eagle, a Viking rite that some claim was practiced in antiquity. And this is the next one. So I will try fast forwarding and see how that goes. In both the Christ that is crudely drawn by children in Stephen King's story and this sacrificed outsider with flowers instead of eyes, the body of those sacrificed works as a canvas, incorporating natural elements, corn for hair, flowers for eyes, for instance, highlighting animistic and polytheistic pagan notions. In Midsummer, one of the most gruesome sacrifices, of course, takes place near the beginning of the movie, and it is that of the older couple who voluntarily plunge to their death. The scene in which the old man, who is still alive, is bludgeoned to death with an enormous sledgehammer or maul is grotesque and repulsive, to say the least. I will spare you from that scene, even without knowing that we would have this technical problem. I would now like to turn to the clip right before that happens, though, in order to discuss one last aspect related to the horror of sacrifice. So we can see that in the following clip. Let's see. In this segment of the movie, the people of Harga look up towards the cliff, where the older couple are being carried before the latter sacrifice themselves. In this shot, the community blends effortlessly with the backdrop of the quarry through the white and cream tones of their clothing and of the stone cliffs behind them. Only the outsiders, Danny, Christian, and Josh, contrast through the dark colors of their clothes, but most importantly, because of their fidgeting movement, versus the calm stance of the Harga, who look solemn and serene as an entity as they look up towards the cliff. In the same frame, two of the members of the community do not look merely solemn. We might say that they actually look pleased and even radiant. For me, the most poignant moment is at the end of the clip, or near the end, when a young boy looks back at us, drawing us into the frame and into the gathering, beckoning us to join them and also witness the offering. This simple yet powerful gesture turns us from mere spectators to participants, bidding us to choose sides. We may either join the tight-knit Harga or the fragmented group of the unsettled outsiders. The tranquility exhibited by the Harga in this scene, followed by the shocking suicide of the older couple, is one of the reasons for why this film seems to deeply upset many of its viewers. It is not merely the gore of the sacrifices portrayed, but the calm demeanor of the local observers as the offerings take place. After Shirley Jackson's tale, The Lottery, was published in 1948, readers were equally horrified about the matter-of-fact attitude of townspeople as they gathered to witness the ritual stoning of one of its inhabitants during a midsummer celebration. As mentioned previously, this story is one of the foundational texts in this type of literature, and a superb tale at that. The following quotations from this classic display the contrast between a seemingly idyllic country gathering and the composed determination with which the villagers carry out the ritual. So as you can see in quote 1, we have this idyllic description and setting. And it seems obviously harmless, completely harmless, not only harmless, but also enchanting and quaint. And we have elements here. Well, we have the mentioning of Midsummer, which is June 27th. And Midsummer, by the way, the exact date varies depending on the place where it's celebrated. But in any case, in the story, it's June 27th. It's clear, it's sunny. There's flowers that are blooming or blossoming. There's also the mentioning of the lottery. It seems, pretty like a regular event. The whole lottery took less than 2 hours, so it could begin at 10 o'clock in the morning. And then children, the children assembled first. School was recently over for the summer, and the feeling of liberty sat uneasily on most of them. And then we have, in quote number 2, at the end of the story, we have this contrast, this very dark contrast, because of the stoning that takes place. So then we find out that the person chosen with the lottery or through the lottery was to be, stoned, and obviously the scapegoat in this kind of celebration, if you want to call it that. So, and we have phrases that one would use in a regular event. So, come on, hurry up. And then the poor woman, Mrs. Hutchinson, says, it isn't fair. It isn't fair. It isn't right. And then at the end, she screams, and then they were upon her. As in Midsummer, the members of this community behave calmly about the ritual killing of one of its members, displaying a demeanor that often proves to be more shocking to the readers and audiences than the actual sacrifice itself. The last section of this talk will be dedicated to aspects related to the comforts of ritual. After considering the horror in rituals, especially extreme ones such as human sacrifice, one might question why there has even been an interest in tales featuring belief systems that delve into practices as extreme as these. But as Joshi has noted about Machen's work, and whoops, sorry, that's another clip. And Joshi says the following: however brutalized people are by the dominant materialism of the age, their sense of spirituality can well up in spite of themselves in the practice of these sacraments. I would add that it is because of this dominant materialism and its spiritual vacuity and sense of vertigo that people feel currently that spirituality becomes a necessity for many. Let's consider the following clip in which Christian is attempting, but not quite succeeding in celebrating Danny's birthday. So I will describe this one instead of even fast forwarding it, because I'm afraid the whole, we might have a problem because of it. So basically in this one, Christian has clearly forgotten that it's Danny's birthday. A friend reminds him, and he's trying to light a candle on a slice of cake that he's found. And it's not really working. He's not really lighting the candle, and he's very nervous and very obvious about forgetting Danny's birthday. Danny's also very uncomfortable. And then in the back, we have this group of women rocking, I'm assuming, a newborn baby. So we have this contrast once again. First of all, Christian is wearing this darker t-shirt. Danny's wearing a lighter one. So that right there visually separates the two. And they're further separated because of the group of women in the background who are actually not separated amongst them. They're, there's this union that we can sense there. And they're moving back and forth in unison. So basically, that's what I wanted to comment on that. Also, I'm going to read this bit. In other words, the type of ritual presented in the background offers a sense of stability and belonging, as other rituals in pagan Gothic texts also suggest. After this failed attempt to celebrate Danny's birthday, she is welcomed into her new family by becoming the May Queen. This feeble birthday celebration contrasts severely with Danny's crowning and rebirth during Midsummer, a commemoration of fertility and new life. The matter of language is one of the most compelling aspects of the movie, and one which most strongly suggests this community's unity and that of a pre-Christian faith that does not rely heavily on reason, but on emotion. In the next clip, the old couple who has volunteered to sacrifice themselves is being honored at a banquet. Despite a few words and phrases, the majority of this dialogue, quote unquote, is composed of another kind of language, relying heavily on the body and emotion, not on rational thought or on a signifier and a signified, as most languages do today. So this is this clip, and I'm just gonna play a little bit of the clip, perhaps. So as you can see, the breathing substitutes the spoken word, and also other parts of their communication relies upon body language. Perhaps one of the most poignant examples of the intense emotional language requiring no words or abstractions takes place when several women bolster or support Dani after she has witnessed her boyfriend Christian having sex in a deflowering and fertility ritual with one of the community's virgins. Her hysterical reaction, instead of being dismissed, and I was talking about this scene, or discouraged, is actually mirrored by the women who share in the spectrum of emotions that Dani is experiencing. Near the beginning, Mark, one of her boyfriend's friends, disparaged her neediness, claiming that she should get a psychiatrist instead of constantly calling her boyfriend. Mark's reaction represents the individualistic stance in most modern Western societies, whereas this last scene from the movie confirms the existence of a cathartic language based on mirroring emotion and the notion that about the interconnectedness of bodies, both concepts supported by pagan belief in these works. The behavior of the women who acknowledge and amplify Dani's feelings, thus helping her process her grief, reveals how hive mentality and the rituals practiced in pagan Gothic texts might provide comfort and direction in the otherwise nebulous landscape of modernity, in which everything has turned relative and uncertain. I'm going to play a tiny clip of the clip, and then that's the last of the clips. So it shouldn't be a problem anymore. Okay. As a conclusion, I would like to offer a possible reason for the appeal of pagan Gothic texts. When discussing Arthur Machen's work, published mostly at the end of the 19th century, Aaron Worth detects elements that generated interest in his readers. And he said the following: reading them, one is particularly struck by their insistence on the ineluctability of rite and ritual, ceremony and mystery, as sources of meaning in the age of religious decline. They explore, too, the abiding appeal of sympathetic magic and of other primitive practices. Let me see. Machen's work emerged in a time in which Darwin's and other scientists' works had managed to shake the foundations of Christian faith through the notion of evolution. Whatever our religious or spiritual beliefs are, most of us can agree that in our current context, we are faced with a similar spiritual wasteland, and I would argue caused more by the lack of ritual than by the lack of religion itself. I recently came across the work of South Korean philosopher Byung-Chul Han, whose 2020 work or text called The Disappearance of Rituals echoes Aaron Ward's opinion about Machen's, about the times that we live in. Byung-Chul Han argues, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen now. Excuse me for a second. Byung-Chul Han argues that our modern world is characterized by an ironic overload of communication and at the same time a lack of community, noting the vacuity of excessive and superficial information and the disconnection that too much, and I quote, connection generates. Furthermore, he insists that social media and most recently the pandemic threaten the social fabric that used to be comprehended and held together through rituals. And he says the following: social media and the permanent mise-en-scène of the ego exhaust us because they destroy the social and community fabric. The virus accelerates the disappearance of rituals and the erosion of the community. Even the rituals that remained, such as attending a soccer match, or a concert, dining in a restaurant, or going to the theater or the movies are being eliminated. He also discusses the insoluble link between ritual and body. And a link that is evidenced time and again in the examples that I have discussed, mainly in Midsummer. And I quote, this is another quote by the same philosopher, and the last one. Rituals are processes of incorporation and corporeal stagings. The current orders and values in a community are experienced and are consolidated through the body. Rituals generate a corporeal knowledge and a corporeal memory, a corporeal identity. This philosopher's perceptive observations about the role of the body versus only reason and rationalism and the current loss of ritual support the notion that modern readers and audiences thirst for pagan Gothic texts because of these works' exploration of traditions and rites, often dark and gruesome, but at least visceral and tangible. Even readers and viewers who flinch at gory scenes presented, like myself, are intrigued by the dark rites portrayed. In an era in which we are saturated with too much communication, but not enough community, as Chul Han notes, our minds and bodies thirst for the blood, the guts, and the tears, the messy matter of humanity that is showcased in these offerings. After all, a turning away from rituals and from the foulness of death is a turning away from life itself. Thank you very much.
Professor Ilse M, thank you very much for sharing with us all your knowledge. What an amazing research. You ranged from literature to sculpture to cinema. That's fantastic. How are you feeling? I've been talking for an hour, but we have a few questions.
Sure, I'll be glad to I actually want to hear from people what they also think, because as I said, even though I did quite a bit of research for this is the beginning, because I'm much more comfortable in the 19th century. So I have a lot of reading, a lot of homework to do with contemporary novels and works. And I would like to say something, Professor Seravalle, that I meant to say at the beginning, but I was so busy concentrating on pronouncing Portuguese properly that I completely skipped the part in which I'm thanking you, of course, and everybody that organized the conference. And I wanted to thank you for having me here. And it's a privilege to be here and to have received your invitation.
Oh, thank you so much. We are pleased to have you. For us, it's an honor. We have a question here for Anna Reed. Ilse, I think I know Anna Reed. I know her name.
I know Anna Reid, of course.
Anna Reid, the Anna Reid. Ilse, you have mentioned paganism, Catholicism, and Protestantism in relation to the great god Pan. Could you explain a little further?
Wow, Anna, that's a tough question, especially coming from a friend. Basically, well, it's interesting because sort of writing this conclusion, I was thinking that despite the difference in all these isms, paganism, Catholicism, Protestantism, it seems that there is this common denominator through the three of them. And Machen himself was very religious, and he was very interested in Catholicism, like I mentioned previously, because Catholicism doesn't make a big effort at at getting rid of rituals. It actually insists upon, the rituals taking place in Mass. So I think that in the Great God Pan and in Machen's work in general, beyond only talking about how great Catholicism is, for example, or how great paganism is and how not great Protestantism is, I think he's talking more about opening up to the idea that we should not limit our views of the world or our mental abilities only to reason. That I think he's calling for a more integral vision and using the body, using emotion, and using reason, more than just talking about the difference between these isms. So I hope that was sort of an answer for Anna.
And here's another one from Jaqueline Bondonada. Contemporary life is poor in rituals with profound.
Sorry, we lost your audio, Professor Saravaje, or maybe it was just me.
No, I'm sorry, I was muted.
Okay.
So Jaqueline Bondonada says, contemporary life is poor in rituals with profound religious spiritual meaning. Our rituals are mostly spectacles. Could this lack relate to the fascination exercised by representation of ritual? I'm sorry, Ilse, I think you're muted now.
Sorry, we keep muting ourselves. Yes, sorry. I was saying it gave me a chance to think, so I'm glad for the muting. Okay, I was mentioning that this is a very interesting question because at least the way I'm interpreting spectacle, spectacle to me sounds like it's very affected and there's this too much of an effort to appear to be something or to give a sense of something, and that it's spectacle to me sounds very artificial, and so I think that this this obsession with selfies and with image and with surface is a very poor way of compensating for depth, and it's actually underlining the lack of ritual in our everyday lives. This issue of posting everything on Facebook on, oh, I went to this restaurant, I ate this, and I mean that's not the stuff that rituals are made of. It's sort of a very poor substitute. At least that's how I feel about it.
Is that why these films are so popular?
Which film, sorry?
Films like Midsummer.
Yes, that's sort of like my main conclusion, I think, if there is one, that these films and these stories, beyond just responding to people's needs to see, gory episodes or rights, I think it answers to our need for some structure and for some stability in this sort of like wasteland, in this, virtual wasteland that we're floating around in, I think.
We have a question from Claudio Zanini. What connections do you see between your previous work with postmodern photography and this research on Pagan Gothic?
Thank you, Claudio. And how are you, Claudio? I'm glad that you could be here. Too bad we can't really, be in the same sort of like in the same place, but at least we are in this sort of virtual reality. Yes, that's another interesting question. I was thinking about that when I listened to you mention that research about postmodern photography. And it's interesting how texts choose researchers instead of the other way around. Like, it seems like I have this interest in rituals, right? And in practices that people need to go through to make sense of life. I think that with postmodern photography and the rituals that we saw here today, there is this need for people to make sense of life through these practices that are very cathartic. So postmodern photography, it's not only photography, it's also the rites that accompany a person's death. So the family dressing the person who has been, who's deceased, the person holding a wake in their house instead of a funeral home. We're distanced from that now. Everything is so sanitized that we're distanced from death, we're distanced from the body. And I believe that that's actually not very good for us, because it doesn't allow for this catharsis in grieving that we need in the case of people dying. But also in these rituals, it's almost as if we need to incorporate death into our world to make sense of also of life. Like, death is part of life, but there's so much distancing, like I mentioned before, that we've lost that connection, I think.
We have a question here from Vitor Fernandes. He's asking you if you watched Bacurau.
No, I haven't. Could you?
Have you heard about it?
No. Could you expand? Maybe.
He mentions it because there is the use of psychedelic drugs in the end. This small community, they use this psychedelic drug to get rid of the foreign attackers.
Okay.
I'll send you a reference later on.
Yes, that's exactly what I was going to ask, because like I mentioned before, I mean, this is sort of like the initial platform for a lot more research that I'd be interested in doing, because this is pretty recent. Yeah. So thank you for that question, and please send that reference.
I will. What a great start, Ilse. We had a question from Amanda Heuber, but I cannot find it here.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not able to see questions either, I don't think. Or maybe I see Claudio's. I see Victor Fernandez's question now. I hadn't seen it, sorry. But you mentioned that one. And then I don't see the rest of the question, sorry.
The thread is really long. So many comments. There are congratulations on your English.
Oh, thank you. It's better than my Portuguese.
Is it is it your first language? No, it's your second language.
I'm bilingual. My dad was American, so in different levels, bilingual people are they have different levels, I guess, of bilingualism. I see some questions about the 19th century, which is my type of century, from Renata Filipov. What about the 19th century poets such as Baudelaire and De Quincey and the reference to drugs? Oh, yeah. Yeah, like I said, I feel very much at home in the 19th century, so I'm very tempted to stay there. And yeah, all of these poets, los poetas malditos, which is what they're called in Spanish, right? Or they're very interested in this because of this detachment from reason. And I should have said at the beginning too, but part of the reason for the label Pagan Gothic is because Gothic literature stems from romanticism. It's a dark romanticism. And Baudelaire and De Quincey, all of these are, even though they might not be romantic per se, some of them, they're in the same region. And this is a part of the reason why they're so interested in drugs, in that detachment of reason, and basing your life basically more on emotion and the body. So hopefully that answered that question.
Right, I found Amanda's question. I'm curious to know the professor's opinion about the relationship between The Wicker Man and Midsummer and the female representation in both movies. These are two questions, I think.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, what I can say is, what comes to my mind right now to say about it is that, I mean, The Wicker Man is such a classic. There's so many things to say about it. It's inevitable for it to appear in Midsummer because Ari Aster, the director, was actually commissioned to write a folk horror story or film or script. And he's inevitably referring to classics such as The Wicker Man. So The Wicker Man is very much present. As for the women, I believe Dani's representation, there's different ways of looking at it in Midsummer. Some people say she's clearly just a victim of the cult. And, she's engulfed by this hive mentality and she's grieving from the loss of her parents and her sister at the beginning. And then at the end, she's involved in the death of Christian, of her boyfriend, or she's actually the one who decides that he should be sacrificed. So some people say, well, she's been brainwashed. She's not able to think for herself. The other way to look at it is she's achieved autonomy and agency by feeling that she belongs somewhere and that she has a family, right? Which she doesn't have in the outer world anymore. So you could look at it either way. And then in The Wicker Man, you have these sort of like femme fatale women. So I would say they're not as complex as Dani is in Midsummer, which makes sense because The Wicker Man is from 1973. So the depiction of these women is a lot more traditional and conventional, I think.
Ilse, thank you very much. Yes, indeed. The boys, the scholar boys, they ignore Dani. They completely, she's mistreated by them. And then she finds comfort in the community. Absolutely. Amanda says, thank you. And I'd like to say thank you again. I think we should stay here for today. Yeah, call it a day. And I'd like to invite Márcio back again, and also Professor Clélia and Professor Isabella, just to say goodbye. And thank you all for the event. We're going to switch to Portuguese, you'll see.
Sure, of course. I will do my best and follow. Thank you very much once again, Professor Seravaje. I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
We thank you. All right.
Olá.
Oi.
Olá.
Isabela, Clélia.
Olá.
Nós vamos...
Hello.
Bem, gostaria então de agradecer a incrível conferência de encerramento que a gente teve. Todas as falas nas mesas, nas sessões de comunicação, foram muito elogiadas e tenho certeza que isso foi por conta de um esforço conjunto de muitas pessoas. Ao todo foram praticamente 50 envolvidos na organização desse SEG, né, entre professores, estudantes, monitores, e ainda eu digo que foi um número muito pequeno em relação ao que de fato a gente precisava, né? Muitos de nós acabamos por cobrir muitas funções, ter um acúmulo muito grande de funções, e a gente foi obrigado a ter um know-how sobre a produção de eventos online que a gente não tinha. Então, por um lado, a gente pensou, depois de discutir sobre como que a gente ia operar com o SEG, né, porque a gente fez 2 adiamentos, né, da data inicial que a gente estava prevendo, então a gente decidiu fazer um evento que fosse virtual, né, e esse virtual low cost, né, então com custos que pudessem apenas pagar a operacionalidade desse sistema. Então, nesse sentido, agradeço enormemente a professora Isabela Drozdowska-Bruggen, que deu um suporte enorme para nós, especialmente no sentido de conseguir elaborar toda a comunicação do nosso evento, né, a partir dos mails que foram criados, e também ela teve uma participação preponderante na curadoria, né, então, das nossas sessões temáticas, né. Então, estendo todos os cumprimentos que eu ouvi em sessões de como a curadoria estava muito boa à professora Isabela. Obrigado.
Obrigada, sou eu que posso falar agora uma palavrinha. Muito obrigada a todas e todos. Márcio, muito gentil como sempre. Mas o prazer foi meu. É sempre uma alegria colaborar com esses meus colegas e amigos, posso dizer, da UFSC, e também com os nossos alunos da graduação e, sobretudo, da pós-graduação, que estão nos bastidores, quase invisíveis, mas têm uma importância tremenda nos eventos como este. E também gostaria de parabenizar todos que apresentaram, não somente nas mesas, nas conferências, mas também nas sessões de comunicações que acabaram, às vezes, ultrapassando o tempo previsto. Isso, para mim, é um sinal que esse evento, de repente, proporcionou aquilo que a gente quis proporcionar nesses tempos onde estamos privados de contato, criar um espaço de diálogo, um espaço mínimo de diálogo e de trocas. Então, muito obrigada também da minha parte.
Também não poderia deixar de agradecer enormemente a professora Clélia, que foi que me auxiliou a gente criar e pensar toda essa estrutura do evento de forma virtual, e a gente precisou fazer vários testes, uso de câmeras, microfones, plataformas, pesquisas. Então, Clélia, muito obrigado também por esse backup que você me deu aí.
Eu adorei, porque eu aprendi muito, né? E gostei demais do grupo que se formou, né? Do nosso grupo em particular, que foi realmente um projeto colaborativo, né, que deu certo. Então, aprendi demais, adorei as mesas, né, e quero fazer um agradecimento especial aos monitores, né, e os moderadores das mesas, né, da pós, da graduação, né, e foi um processo horizontal, que eu gostei bastante. É isso. Assim, e dizer que eu estou representando também a PEGET, que é a pós-graduação de estudos da tradução, né? Então, fica aqui frisado esse apoio, né, que foi dado a todos nós. É isso. Deixo para vocês agora.
Obrigado, só vou responder uma pergunta que está me fazendo ali nos comentários, quando que vai ser o próximo SEG, onde vai ser, não tem nada definido ainda, tem conversa só de bastidores, não vou anunciar nada para ninguém se sentir pressionado por conta disso, mas tenho certeza de que será um evento tão interessante quanto tem sido todos os SEGs que foram realizados até agora. O meu muito abraço, meu beijo para todo mundo, meu muito agradecimento. Foi incrível estar com todos vocês.
Tchau.